Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lisa Stewart Women's Health Center. We're really excited to finally be using this room and getting some good energy in here. I'm going to introduce our speaker. I want to tell you a little bit about how we ended up developing this relationship with Al. Our advisory committee every year talks about some health issue that is pertinent to our community, and we try to put on some kind of program every year that addresses that issue. So several years ago, we were talking about, teens and sexuality and parents' concerns, and one woman on our advisory committee said she had a relative that was in the school in Pennsylvania, and they had this fabulous sex ed teacher. So we thought, do you think we could possibly convince him to come up here? So through a lot of effort by specifically Ellen DeCourty, who contacted Al, we made an arrangement to have him come up, and we were blown away by his presence and his message and his dynamic presentation. It was pretty incredible, and there was an incredible outpouring of enthusiasm. And so we had him come back a couple years after that and extended the programs and spoke at the high school and did workshops for counselors, etc. And we were incredibly grateful that we could tap into this kind of expertise and talent and energy. It was wonderful. And then we got to the point where it was like, all right, we've kind of done this for several years in a row. We thought we would give each other a rest. And he became a TED speaker, was on the cover of the New York Times, and this year in September came out with his first book. And Al got in touch with me and said that he would be willing to come up and, as a gift really, to speak to us again because of the generosity that we've shown him. And I do want to acknowledge that not only has he been incredibly generous with his time and talent, but he also contributed to making the Women's Center a reality. He made a financial contribution to us to make this building happen. So we are incredibly grateful. And I have to say, I heard Al speak probably 15 times. I mean, I've been to every presentation he's done here. But I also had the privilege of visiting his school in Philadelphia. He teaches at the Friends Central School just outside of Philadelphia. And I got to watch him teach not only sex ed, but a couple of his English classes. And I sat there going, where were teachers like this when I was in school? I mean, it would have completely changed my life. And he sent me a copy of his book. And I thought, I've heard him speak a lot, and I thought I really, had the message. But I got to tell you, I read the book and I realized it's the title, For Goodness Sakes, Changing the Way We Talk to Teens About Sexuality, Values, and Health, is so much more than that. There are really incredibly valuable lessons in here for life in general. And I, for one, am incredibly grateful to have met you, known you, become friends. And so I'm going to let him take it from here. But I do want to say, at the end of the program, we have his books for sale outside here, and we'll be selling them, and he'll be signing them afterwards. So, without further ado, I'll
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be back here and feel a very special connection with this community. So thanks for letting me come back and for doing this. So my plan tonight is for us to, I'll talk for, maybe 30-ish minutes, but I want to save a lot of time for conversation and questions. Feel free to ask questions while we're going through the presentation, but know that we have a lot of dedicated time after as well. I'm so happy that we have some young people here. That makes me feel like really grounded and good. And I have to be honest, I've been doing this for a long time. Like, I started when I was 21 doing sex ed, and I'm not 21. And sometimes I walk into rooms, and I think people sort of say, "Really? That fat old man is going to talk to me about sex? Really?" Yeah, I am. And it's going to be fun. So I just want to fill in a couple of blanks about who I am and what I'm going to do here tonight, and then we're going to get right to it. So first and foremost, I'm your guest, and I'm so thankful, as I said, to be here. I want to be respectful of your time, of your community, of your values. I'm an educator, so that means I'm not a therapist and I'm not a medical professional, and I try to keep those lines really clear. So as an educator, my job is to share information and help young people and anyone learn and practice skills, and that's where I try to keep my expertise. I am not just a creepy old man who talks about sex. I actually have a degree in it. I got a degree in human sexuality education from the University of Penn. My main focus is trying to help young people, and by extension all of us, become more sexually healthy. We live in a society that is not very sexually healthy. And lastly, I'm really not here to tell you what to do, to make any suggestions about your community. That's all up to you. I just want to share some ideas and raise some awareness and questions and see where we go. So as Linda said, there's been a lot happening with me in the last few years. The New York Times Magazine came to our school, Friend Central. I'm saying our, not in the royal we, but it's like we're a community at school, so forgive me for that. They came to Friend Central. Really, it was a fluke of how it all happened, and I think at the school, we sort of didn't know what we didn't know. So I said to my head of school, can we have a Times reporter come in and sit in for a few weeks and talk to the kids and record some classes? And he went, yeah. And I think if I ever tried to do that today, there would be large numbers of meetings and lawyers, but we just let her come in. And she really saw the real thing, and it was a great article. I've done 3 TED Talks, 2 are online. The first has over 1 million views. I'm really happy about that. And the book is selling pretty well. So that's, if you want to find me online, there's a good online presence. I don't have a website yet, but I will soon. And let me just sort of put out, this is the last slide that has a lot of words on it. Most of the rest of the slides are just pictures with a title. But these are my values. These are the bottom line beliefs that I come to you with, so you know where I'm speaking from. First and foremost, I really see sexuality as a force for good, and not as something dirty or shameful or embarrassing or a wild force to be controlled. And I think when you start, if you can start from a place of really believing that our sexuality is a good gift from a good creator and a force for good in the world, it's a lot easier to have these conversations. I'm well aware that our society is not interested in helping us be sexually healthy. It's really interested in making us feel inadequate about our bodies, unhappy with our relationships, not skilled in our sexual abilities and activities. I mean, because then they can sell us something to fix that. So we have a lot of work to do, but we can do it. We actually can get to healthy sexuality. I've seen it happen, but it doesn't happen without work and attention. That work starts with communicating, and we as adults really need to be involved if we want the kids that we love and teach and live around, if we want them to have a better shot at developing healthy sexuality than we might have. So we can't be bystanders as adults. We have to be involved. And you sort of have to let us be a little involved. Which means not just immediately running away when we start to bring up topics of sex. We know it's uncomfortable, but trust me, the only way to do awkward is to walk through awkward and come out the other end of it, and then you're like, oh, I can do that. So, okay, so that's sort of where I'm starting. So people say to me, oh my God, Al, you're a sexuality educator. What was your life like growing up? You must have had like such liberal parents and come from such a wacky house. Were you all hippies or something? Like, this is my family. I came from an Italian-American Roman Catholic family in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My parents were married for 15 years before they had kids. I think they were doing it wrong. Then they figured it out, and I came along, And then 2.5 years later, my brother came along. And that's my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. For my parents' 25th wedding anniversary, I was 10, my brother was 8. We went to Disney World, which was a really great way to celebrate their anniversary. So my parents were older. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. My mom wanted to go to high school, but was sent to business school because she had to get a job. My dad started at a vocational high school, but World War II broke out, and the war effort took over all the school shops, and so the students had nothing to do, so my dad dropped out. So I'm the first person in this family to go to college. My brother and I both have professional degrees. He's a pediatrician, I'm a teacher. And I wanted to start just by reading 2 very little sections from the book about when my parents talked to me about sex, just to give you a sense of where my starting point was. Okay. So, when my mom wanted to have a sex talk with me, her own discomfort with discussing anything sexual led her to use secret language. She sat me down at the kitchen table one day when I was 13 or 14, and she told me we should have a talk about the Marriage Act. She said that as I was growing up, I would become more interested, in the Marriage Act. She said it was natural to be curious about it, and she said that the Marriage Act was a beautiful thing when used properly, but it was only for married people. That's why it was called the Marriage Act. She asked me if I had any questions. The question I most wanted to ask was, what the hell is the Marriage Act? Instead, I shook my head no and got as far away from the kitchen table as I could. Of course, she was referring to sexual intercourse. But it would be a couple of years before I figured that out. I already knew what intercourse was by the time I was 13. But there was no way I could connect it to Mom's Marriage Act. I look back on this encounter with some sadness today. My mom was trying to be a good parent, to convey to me information as well as a value framework for sexual intercourse. But because she was uncomfortable, she resorted to secret language. The resulting conversation was awkward, short-lived, and never repeated. When my dad gave me his version of the sex talk, he had a problem with the words. He called me into my parents' bedroom one evening when I was about 15. I thought I was in trouble, or that someone had died, because those were the 2 reasons why you got called into our parents' bedroom. Instead, my dad said to me, it's time we had a talk about mastication. I thought I had misheard him. I was sure he was talking about masturbation and not chewing, but he continued. Lots of boys your age masticate. That's normal. But you can't masticate too much. And you don't want to think dirty things about girls when you masticate. You have to respect women. I sat there biting the insides of my cheeks so I wouldn't laugh at my pop, who was really trying his best. Should I have used this as a teachable moment to gently and lovingly let him know the difference between the words masticate and masturbate? I was 15, grossly embarrassed, and still not sure I wasn't in trouble. So I did what most teenagers did. I said, okay, Pop, thanks, and got the hell out of there. I must admit that although hilarious, this was not a bizarre moment in our house. My pop was famous for mixing up words. My favorite was when he called the gas pedal in the car the exhilarator. Get your goddamn foot off the exhilarator, he would yell at me when I was learning to drive. You trying to kill me? So that's where I came from, okay? That was the sex ed that I had. And that was it, really. And I learned about sex ed the way most young people learn about sex ed, from their friends, from what was on TV and in the media. And this was, believe it or not, before the internet. So I used a lot of libraries. I used to go to the library. This will make no sense to you, so just and I memorized all the Dewey Decimal System numbers for books about sex, so I knew exactly where they were. And I would walk in the library and grab a book off the shelf, and then walk somewhere else and go read it. And then, never go put it back, of course. And what I figured out was, I was really okay thinking about this stuff and talking about it. And it didn't seem weird to me in the way it seemed to make other people tongue-tied. And so here I am, doing it for a living. And I'm not doing it, talking about sex for a living. And really, really liking it. Okay? So that's just a little bit of background. So here we go. We're going to start with a little game. Okay? And here's the way this game works. I'm going to say a letter of the alphabet. And I want you to think about the very first sexually related word or phrase that pops into your head. You don't need to say it out loud. If you feel really moved to do so, we'll listen, but you don't need to. And I just want you to take stock of what pops into your head. And if there's a feeling that follows that, what is that feeling? Okay? And we're just going to do 2 letters. We're going to make it easy. So here's the first letter. Don't overthink it. Just go with your gut. What's the first thing that pops into your head when I say A? Yeah, go ahead, whisper. Yeah. Right. It's probably the same one. All right. How about this one? P. Now, yeah. Now, if you're when I do this with high school students, they howl and they shout things out loud. You're being very controlled. For most people, when we do this activity, what comes into our head first is often a body part or a sexual activity. And very often, there also may come with that some emotional kick. Sometimes people might feel embarrassed. Oh my God, I can't believe I thought of that. Some people might think, oh, I'm going to think about that some more. Some people feel, but very few people feel proud of the word that comes to them. Very few people would want to turn and share that word with their neighbor and have a conversation about it, right? Which really tells us something. It really tells us that when it comes to sexuality, our sort of bottom line, the place where we go sort of instinctively and first, is not really a place of health and positive and goodness and joy and, you know, like what if the first thing we thought of when we heard the letter P was pleasure? That would be a word we could talk about and have conversations about, but it almost never is the first word we think of, right? You know, for A, what if we thought of, I don't know, asexual or agender, which would show us that we have a sense of the variety of ways people can be in the world. But we mostly think of ass or some other version of that word, you know? And that's okay. But what really is our bottom line when push comes to shove about sexuality, and where did that come from? And I think in America, there really are 2 prominent bottom lines, and both of them are difficult, and I want to get rid of them, but I want to name them first. So a lot of us, I certainly did, grew up with the bottom line that I call the disaster model. The best example of this comes from this great sex ed video from the 1990s. It was called No Second Chances. And it was there was a school nurse, and she was teaching a sex ed class to a bunch of teenagers. And one brave young man raised his hand in the class and said, "What if I don't want to wait until I'm married to have sex?" And the nurse didn't miss a beat, and she said, "Well, then I guess you'll just have to be prepared to die." Yeah, like that was her answer. Totally serious. You know, now go have a healthy relationship. So every time we get bombarded with those messages that sex is dangerous, that sex is dirty, that it's going to lead to trouble, that it's a disaster waiting to happen, that we're going to get warts on our genitals, that we're going to wind up in trouble or unhappy, how then do we possibly go from that bottom line to creating a successful, fun, loving, pleasurable relationship? It's really hard to do. So this bottom line is not very useful, but it's ubiquitous. It's all around us in America. The other bottom line, which is a little more recent, comes to us from porn. Porn is not new, but of course the availability of it on the internet is. The latest studies say that young people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, see their first sexually explicit material online by age 11. And there are some studies that put that even younger, like at 8. And it's not often always because kids are looking for it. You know, sometimes a kid types the wrong thing into Google, right? Somebody wants to look up wants to buy black tights, but they spell tights wrong. They spell it T-I-T-S, and then push enter in Google, right? Or somebody hears a word, not really sure what it means. What have we taught kids? What's a good strategy? Look up the definition, find out what it means. So you put that in dictionary.com, and all of a sudden, and if you just click the image tab instead of the web tab, there you are, right? So it's not about that, you know, all kids are trolling for porn. It's just that it's there, and they're going to see it. And really, no matter how good our filters are, and no matter how much we wish otherwise, it's really, really hard to keep young people from seeing sexually explicit materials today. They may not see it in your home, but you know, they're carrying the internet with them every day on their phones. And the problem with porn is it tells us two things about sex that are not true, but that seem like